Sarah Thornton stood at the edge of her property, watching the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the meadow. 9 months a widow, and every day the weight of her husband Robert's absence pressed heavier upon her shoulders. Not from missing him, since their marriage had been one of convenience rather than passion, but from the mountain of debt he'd left in his wake. She pulled her shawl tighter against the autumn chill. The aspen leaves shimmered gold in the breeze, a stark contrast to the dark pines that climbed the mountainside behind her modest ranch house. In the distance, her 9-year-old son Thomas chased the ranch dog through tall grass, his laughter carrying on the wind. That sound, Thomas's happiness, was what she fought to preserve. "Mrs. Thornton?" Sarah turned to find Elias Daniels, the bank manager, standing awkwardly by the fence post, clutching his hat in his hands. "Mr. Daniels?" She was well aware that his unexpected visits never brought good news. "I'm afraid I can't extend your deadline any further." His eyes darted away from hers. "The bank requires payment by the end of the month." "But that's barely 2 weeks," Sarah protested, her voice steady despite the panic fluttering in her chest. "The cattle sale won't cover half what's owed by your own accounting." He shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Thornton, I've been as accommodating as possible, but your husband's debts were unknown to me until after his death," she finished, a familiar bitterness rising in her throat. Robert's gambling had remained his secret until the creditors came calling, their sympathy for the young widow evaporating when they learned how much was owed. "Nevertheless," Daniels replaced his hat, "if payment isn't received, foreclosure proceedings will begin November 1st. After he departed, Sarah called Thomas in for supper, maintaining the calm facade she'd perfected since Robert's death. Only after her son was asleep did she allow herself to sink into a kitchen chair, hands trembling as she reviewed her accounts once more. The numbers hadn't changed. They never did, no matter how many times she recalculated. The Carson Creek General Store hummed with Saturday morning activity. Sarah pushed her cart methodically through the aisles, calculating each purchase against her dwindling funds. "Sarah Thornton?" The deep voice behind her belonged to Harrison Wells, owner of the largest cattle operation in the county. At 50, his hair had silvered at the temples, but he maintained the straight-backed posture and clear-eyed gaze that had intimidated her since she'd first arrived in Carson Creek as Robert's bride. "Mrs. Thornton, might I have a word in private?" He glanced meaningfully at the crowded store. Curiosity overrode caution. "I can spare a few minutes." Outside, Mr. Wells led her to a bench beneath the store's awning. "I understand you're facing foreclosure?" Sarah stiffened. "News travels fast." "That's to be expected in small towns." He smiled without humor. "I'd like to make you a proposition." "A proposition?" she repeated carefully. "A business arrangement." Mr. Wells removed his gloves deliberately. "I'll clear your debts, all of them, and ensure you and your boy want for nothing." "In exchange for?" "Marriage." Sarah nearly laughed, certain she'd misheard. "I beg your pardon?" "You need financial security. I need a wife." His tone was matter of fact. "It needn't be complicated." "Mr. Wells, with all due respect, you'd retain your ranch, though it would be managed alongside my holdings. Your son would receive the education he deserves, and you would have the security that's eluded you since your husband's passing." Sarah studied him, searching for the mockery or hidden agenda in his offer. Finding none, she asked the obvious question. "Why me?" Something flickered in his eyes. There was an emotion she couldn't name. "You've shown remarkable resilience these past months, since your husband's death. I admire that. And I'm not interested in a young girl looking for romance or a widow seeking status. I want a practical arrangement with someone sensible." "You want a loveless marriage?" "I want a partnership," he corrected. "One that benefits us both." Sarah thought of Thomas, of the home she was about to lose, of the uncertain future that awaited them. "I need some time to think about this." "Of course." Mr. Wells stood. "But please do not take too much time, Mrs. Thornton. Remember, your deadline approaches and my offer won't remain open indefinitely." 3 days later, Sarah found herself seated across from Harrison Wells in his study, the marriage contract between them. The terms were generous. In fact, they were more than fair. Her debts were cleared, Thomas's future was secured, and her ranch would continue to be run under her management. Her hand trembled slightly as she signed. "You're making the practical choice?" Wells said, not unkindly. "I'm making the only choice," she corrected, meeting his gaze. "I won't pretend this is anything but what it is, Mr. Wells." Harrison, he said, if we're to be married in 2 days' time, you should use my given name. Sarah acknowledged his request with a short nod. The wedding was a small, civil affair, attended only by the necessary witnesses. Thomas had accepted the news with the adaptability of childhood, more excited about their move to the Grandwells ranch house than concerned about his mother's new husband. That night, after settling Thomas in his new room, Sarah prepared herself for what she assumed were her marital obligations. When she entered the master bedroom in her nightgown, Harrison sat in an armchair by the fire, still fully dressed. "There's something you should know," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite his. "Please sit." Sarah complied, confused by his formality. "Our arrangement isn't what you believe it to be." He poured 2 glasses of brandy, offering her one. "I'm not interested in a physical relationship." She took the small glass, relief flooding her, followed immediately by suspicion. "Then why—" "I'm dying?" He stated it plainly, without self-pity. "Consumption. The doctors give me perhaps a year if I'm fortunate." Sarah stared at him, the brandy forgotten in her hand. "I don't understand." "My family, cousins primarily, have been circling like vultures since my diagnosis. They care nothing for this land or the people who depend on it. They'd sell it off piecemeal and return east with the profits." His mouth twisted. "I needed someone who would protect what I've built. Someone deserving. So I'm what? Your heir?" The realization dawned slowly. "You and your son, yes. But you'll face challenges?" "My relatives won't surrender their perceived inheritance without a fight, but I've made the legal arrangements as airtight as possible." Sarah set down her glass, her mind racing. "Does anyone else know about your illness?" "My lawyer knows. And my doctor, of course." Harrison hesitated. "I should let you know that I've sent for my brother Matthew." "You have a brother?" In the months since Robert's death, she'd heard every piece of Carson Creek gossip. A Wells brother had never been mentioned. "We are estranged and have been for nearly 10 years. Harrison's expression hardened. "But he knows ranching better than most. He needs to learn the specifics of this operation before—" He gestured vaguely. "Before I'm unable? And does he know about me? About our arrangement?" "He knows I've married. The rest." Harrison sighed, and for the first time Sarah noted how tired he looked. "Matthew will form his own opinions, regardless of what I tell him." Sarah was not quite sure she understood the complexity of the situation she'd just entered, but she did understand that this was not just a business arrangement, but a deathbed promise. This was also not just a marriage of convenience, but a transfer of legacy. Harrison continued, "I want to inform you that separate bedrooms are prepared. Your reputation in town will be protected. We will be seen as husband and wife in all ways. But your privacy is yours." "Thank you," she said, meaning it, but then paused. "When does your brother arrive?" "Tomorrow." The weight of Harrison's illness was visible in the slump of his shoulders. "And with him, I suspect, comes the storm." Matthew Wells arrived with the first snow of the season, a flurry of white that dusted the mountain peaks and settled briefly on the valley floor before melting into mud. Sarah watched from the parlor window as he dismounted. His resemblance to Harrison was unmistakable despite being younger by nearly 15 years. Where Harrison was deliberate and controlled, Matthew moved with restless energy. His dark hair fell carelessly across his forehead as he handed the reins to a stable hand, his expression guarded as he surveyed his brother's home before heading toward the porch. She watched until he disappeared from her view. "You must be the new Mrs. Wells." Sarah turned, startled to find him standing in the doorway. She hadn't heard him enter. "And you must be Matthew." She extended her hand. "Sarah." He took it briefly, his grip firm but impersonal. "Quite the whirlwind romance, from what I hear. Married barely a week after meeting?" The implication was clear in his tone. Sarah withdrew her hand. "Your brother and I have an understanding." "I'm sure you do." His smile didn't appear genuine. "Where is Harrison?" "Resting? The doctor visits this morning." Something flickered across Matthew's face before it was quickly masked. "Resting? At 10 in the morning? That's not like him." Before Sarah could respond, Thomas burst into the room, cheeks flushed from playing outside. "Mama!" "Is that the new horse in the stable? Can I—" He stopped, noticing Matthew. "Who are you?" "Thomas," Sarah chided gently. "This is Mr. Wells, Harrison's brother. Another Mr. Wells? Thomas frowned in confusion. Matthew's expression softened slightly. You can call me Matthew. He crouched to Thomas's level. And yes, that's my horse. Do you ride? As Thomas launched into an enthusiastic description of his riding skills, Sarah observed the transformation in Matthew. With her son, the hard edges disappeared, replaced by genuine interest and easy conversation. It was short-lived. When Harrison entered, leaning more heavily on his cane than he had the previous day, Matthew straightened, his walls visibly reconstructing. Brother. Of course you've met my wife and her son. I have. Matthew's gaze flicked between them. Congratulations on your fortuitous union. The tension in the room thickened. Harrison exhaled. Sarah, would you give us a moment? Take Thomas to see Hester about lunch. Sarah, guiding Thomas from the room while straining to hear the brothers' conversation. Their voices remained low, but the sharp edge of Matthew's tone carried through the closed door, words like convenient, timing, and fortune, making his suspicions clear. Harrison's response was too quiet to discern, but when the door opened minutes later, Matthew stormed past her without acknowledgement, his jaw clenched in anger. He knows, Harrison confirmed when she returned to the study. About my condition. Not about our arrangement. He thinks I've manipulated a dying man, Sarah concluded, for now. Harrison lowered himself carefully into his chair. Matthew has always been quick to judge, but equally quick to revise his opinions when he is proven wrong. Give him time. Time, Sarah thought, was the one thing her new husband didn't have. The next few weeks established an uneasy routine. Harrison's health declined visibly, each day seeming to drain more vitality from his tall frame. The doctor visited with increasing frequency, always emerging from Harrison's room with a grim expression that needed no interpretation. There were times when Harrison didn't leave his room at all. On those days, Sarah sat on a chair near his bed and read to him until he sent her away to care for Thomas. Other days, when he did feel better, he'd spend his time on the porch as if he couldn't get enough of the sun and often challenged Thomas to a few checker games, which he thoroughly enjoyed playing. Matthew divided his time between learning the intricacies of the ranch operations and avoiding Sarah. When interaction was unavoidable, he maintained a cold politeness that made clear his opinion of her. One evening, after Thomas was asleep, Sarah found Matthew in Harrison's study, reviewing ledgers by lamplight. He's been asking for you, she said from the doorway. Matthew looked up, shadows emphasizing the fatigue in his face. He'd been working from dawn until well past dusk, splitting his time between her small ranch and Harrison's vast holdings. How is he tonight? Weaker. Sarah didn't soften the truth, but clear-minded. He wants to discuss the northern pasture. Matthew then gathered his papers. As he passed her in the doorway, he paused. You're good with him. Patient. The unexpected acknowledgement surprised her. He's my husband. For all of 3 weeks? His tone held less accusation than before, replaced by something like puzzlement. I gave my word, Sarah said simply, to honor and care for him. His circumstances don't change that. Matthew studied her as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Most women would have hired a nurse by now. I'm not most women, Mr. Wells. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. No, I'm beginning to see that you're not. It was a small shift, but in the days that followed, Sarah noticed Matthew's demeanor changing. He began including her in ranch discussions, seeking her input on decisions affecting her property. When Thomas expressed more interest in Matthew's horse, Matthew offered to teach him proper saddling techniques. The first real breakthrough came during an unexpected blizzard in early December. With ranch hands scattered across the property, securing livestock, Sarah found herself alone with Matthew when Harrison suffered a particularly violent coughing spell. Together they worked to ease his breathing, Sarah supporting Harrison's shoulders while Matthew administered the medicine and cleared blood-flecked spittle from his brother's lips. When Harrison finally drifted into exhausted sleep, they retreated to the hallway, both shaken by the intimate glimpse of mortality. He won't survive the winter, Matthew said hoarsely, voicing what the doctor had implied but never stated directly. No, Sarah agreed, her practical nature refusing platitudes. I don't believe he will. Matthew was frustrated. Why did he do it? Marry now, when he knew. The question seemed directed more at himself than her, but Sarah answered anyway. He wanted to secure the future of his land, of the people who depend on it. By marrying a woman he barely knew? Matthew's suspicion resurfaced. A widow conveniently in need of financial rescue? Sarah's patience, worn thin by weeks of caregiving and worry, finally snapped. Yes, Mr. Wells. Exactly that. A widow with a ranch about to be foreclosed upon and a son to provide for. A widow desperate enough to enter a marriage knowing her husband was dying, knowing she'd spend her honeymoon as a nurse rather than a wife. She stepped closer, anger propelling her forward. If you think I manipulated your brother, you're welcome to that opinion. But I've honored every aspect of our agreement. Can you say the same about the promises you made to him? Matthew flinched as if struck. What promises? To set aside your differences? To help him die knowing what he built will continue? She gestured toward Harrison's door. He's forgiven whatever drove you apart. Have you? Without waiting for his response, Sarah turned and walked away, her composure finally cracking as she reached her room. She allowed herself 10 minutes of tears. Sadness for Harrison's suffering, for Thomas's confusion about his stepfather's illness, and for her own uncertain future before washing her face and returning to her duties. Matthew was gone the next morning before dawn, riding out to check on cattle in the high pastures despite the snow. When he returned after dark, Sarah expected renewed hostility. Instead, he sought her out in the kitchen where she was preparing Harrison's broth. I owe you an apology, he offered. Sarah paused, spoon suspended over the pot. For judging you without knowing you. He removed his hat, turning it in his hands. Harrison and our estrangement was my doing. I left after a disagreement about the ranch's future. I wanted expansion. He favored stability. Words were said that couldn't be unsaid. Until now, Sarah noted. Until he was dying, Matthew corrected bitterly. And even then I assumed the worst when I learned he'd married. That he'd been taken advantage of when vulnerable. And now? Matthew met her gaze directly. Now I see a woman fulfilling vows most would consider discharged by circumstance. I see someone who genuinely cares for my brother's legacy, not just his fortune. The admission visibly cost him. Pride yielding to truth. Sarah acknowledged it with a simple nod. Your brother is a good man. He deserves peace in his final months. As do you. Matthew hesitated. I'd like to help more. With his care. It was the beginning of a partnership neither had anticipated. As December deepened toward Christmas, they established a rhythm. Sarah continued to manage Harrison's medications and comfort during the day, while Matthew took care of the ranch. In the evenings, Matthew took the night shift when coughing often prevented sleep. They worked together to maintain Thomas's spirits amid the somber atmosphere. One day, Matthew gave Thomas a wood carving lesson of a simple horse, while Sarah prepared traditional holiday treats. Unknown to Sarah, Harrison watched their growing cooperation with evident satisfaction. One evening, when Matthew had taken Thomas sledding on a rare good-weather day, he beckoned Sarah to his bedside. You were right to challenge him, Harrison said, his voice weakened to little more than a whisper. Matthew needs someone who won't yield to his stubborn nature. He's been more help than I expected, Sarah admitted, adjusting Harrison's pillows, though I suspect it's for your sake, not mine. Initially, perhaps. Harrison's pale lips curved in a knowing smile. But I've seen how he looks at you when he thinks no one notices. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. I'm sure you are mistaken. I'm a married woman, your wife. Surely he wouldn't. I'm dying, not blind. Harrison interrupted as he took her hand, his once strong fingers now skeletal. When I proposed our arrangement, I didn't anticipate how well you two work together. Sarah felt appalled at his words, even as she wondered if he had been hoping she and Matthew would learn to get along. Matthew and I have simply found a way to work together for your benefit. Harrison's calm expression didn't waver. My benefit would be knowing neither of you will be alone after I'm gone. Harrison, listen to me, Sarah. His grip tightened with surprising strength. What began as a business arrangement with you has become something I never expected. I have a true family, however briefly my time is left. I've come to care for you and Thomas more than I thought. But Matthew, he needs someone to remind him that life continues even after loss. Sarah looked away, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Your brother barely tolerates me. My brother respects you, Harrison corrected. The rest may come with time. Time you believe I should spend with him after your death? Sarah couldn't keep the edge from her voice. Have you discussed this with Matthew? Not in so many words. Then perhaps you shouldn't discuss it with me either. She stood, straightening her skirts. I agreed to be your wife, Harrison. Not to transfer that role to your brother upon your passing. Harrison's energy was visibly waning. Forgive an old man's meddling. I only wish for your happiness. My happiness will come from honoring our agreement and securing Thomas's future, Sarah said firmly. Nothing more. But that night, as she helped Matthew change Harrison's sweat-soaked bedding after a fever spike, she found herself acutely aware of his presence. Matthew's careful strength in his hands as they lifted Harrison, the quiet reassurance in his voice as he spoke, and even the brush of his arm against hers as they worked in the confined space. When their task was complete and Harrison rested comfortably again, they retreated to the kitchen for coffee, the late hour, and shared concern creating an intimacy neither acknowledged. He's getting worse, Matthew said, staring into his cup. Yes. Sarah saw no point in denial. The doctor says it could be days now, or weeks. Not months like he originally led me to believe. Matthew's jaw was tight with suppressed emotion. I wasted so many years. You're here now, Sarah said gently. That's what matters to him. Because of you. Matthew looked up, his gaze intense. If you hadn't challenged me that night, I believe that you would have come to the same conclusion eventually, Sarah finished. I can see that you love your brother. That transcends disagreements? Perhaps. Matthew's expression softened. But your courage reminded me of mine. The compliment warmed her more than it should have. Sarah busied herself with the coffee pot, avoiding his eyes. We should try to rest. Tomorrow will be difficult. Sarah? His use of her given name was rare until now, and it stopped her as she reached the doorway. Whatever happens, I'm grateful you're here, for Harrison and for Thomas. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and hurried to her room, where she sat awake long into the night, troubled by emotions she had no right to feel. Christmas arrived with a fresh blanket of snow and a temporary rally in Harrison's condition. Though still confined to bed, he was alert enough to exchange gifts and even managed to join them for a brief meal in his room, propped up by pillows. Thomas was delighted with his presence. Matthew had given him the carved horse set that he had secretly completed. Harrison gave him his own saddle, and Sarah gave him a new set of storybooks. The boy's excitement brought genuine smiles to everyone's faces. Harrison had encouraged Thomas to try out his new saddle, but didn't argue when Thomas insisted on staying near Harrison's bed. He seemed pleased when Thomas read out loud from one of his new books. Later, when Thomas fell asleep beside Harrison's bed, exhausted from excitement, the three adults shared a moment of contented silence. This is what I wanted, Harrison said finally, his gaze moving between Sarah and Matthew, and then to the sleeping boy curled beside him. To see my family together before I go. Don't talk that way, Matthew protested automatically. We all know the truth, brother. Harrison's acceptance was peaceful rather than resigned. And I find I'm no longer afraid of it, now that I've seen what remains behind. His meaning hung in the air between them. Flustered, Sarah jumped to her feet and busied herself arranging Harrison's medicine for the evening, while Matthew stared out the window at the falling snow. I have one last request, Harrison continued, for both of you. Sarah and Matthew exchanged wary glances. Don't make decisions too quickly after I'm gone, Harrison said. Give yourselves time to know what you truly want. Harrison, Sarah began. I've said my piece, he interrupted gently as he raised a thin hand to stop her protest. Now help me drink that tea you've been fussing with, and tell me about the cattle count in the south pasture. The respite was short-lived. By New Year's Day, Harrison could no longer leave his bed, and speaking required effort he increasingly couldn't spare. The doctor visited daily, administering morphine to ease the pain that medication could no longer mask. Sarah and Matthew maintained their vigil, taking turns reading to Harrison from his favorite books when he was awake, and sitting in comforting silence when he slept. Their shared purpose was making his final days peaceful, and it forged a connection neither had anticipated. One stormy afternoon, while Harrison slept under morphine's influence, Sarah found Matthew in the barn, methodically grooming his horse in the methodical way men often did when needing to occupy their hands during emotional turmoil. The doctor says it will be tonight or tomorrow, she said quietly. His breathing has changed. Matthew's hands stilled on the brush. I suspected as much. Sarah moved closer, drawn by the grief etched in his profile. He's not in pain anymore. That's something to be grateful for. Cold comfort? Matthew's voice was rough. But yes, I'm grateful he's not suffering. On impulse, Sarah placed her hand on his arm. He's at peace with this, Matthew. He's made his preparations, said his goodbyes. Has he? Matthew turned to face her, his expression raw. Because I'm not ready for mine. I don't think we ever are, Sarah said softly. Not really. Something shifted in Matthew's gaze. There was a recognition of shared understanding that transcended words. For a moment, Sarah thought he might embrace her, that he might seek the comfort of human contact against the approaching loss. She froze, not sure what she would do if he did reach out. Instead, he stepped back, creating distance between them. We should return to the house, in case he wakes. Harrison Wells died at dawn on January 2nd, 1896, with Sarah holding one hand and Matthew the other. His passing was quiet, with a final exhale that simply wasn't followed by another. The funeral brought Carson Creek's residents to the Wells Ranch in numbers that surprised Sarah. Men who worked the surrounding properties, shopkeepers from town, families who'd known Harrison for decades. They all came to pay respects to a man whose gruff exterior had concealed genuine care for his community. Also present were Harrison's relatives from back east, the cousins he'd spoken of with such disdain. They eyed Sarah with barely disguised hostility, their whispers about the convenient bride reaching her ears, despite attempts at discretion. Matthew, who had retreated into stoic silence since his brother's death, surprised her by remaining steadfastly at her side throughout the service and burial. When Harrison's cousin Philip approached Sarah with thinly veiled accusations about her hasty marriage, Matthew stepped between them. My brother chose his wife with the same careful consideration he applied to all important decisions, he said, his voice carrying to nearby mourners. Anyone suggesting otherwise disrespects his memory and judgment. The public declaration silenced the whispers, at least temporarily. Later, as the last guests departed, Sarah found Matthew in Harrison's study, a glass of whiskey untouched before him. Thank you, she said simply, for what you said. Matthew nodded, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. It was the truth. Still. Sarah hesitated in the doorway. It means something coming from you. Does it? He looked up, his expression unreadable. After how I first treated you? You've more than made amends for that. Sarah entered the room fully, taking the chair opposite him. What happens now, Matthew? The question encompassed more than she intended. Not just the practical matters of the ranch and Harrison's will, but the undefined relationship that had developed between them. The lawyer comes tomorrow to read the will, Matthew said, addressing only the simplest interpretation. Harrison's intentions will be made clear then. And after the will has been read? Sarah pressed. Matthew studied her, conflict evident in his expression. I suppose that will depend on what those intentions are. The reading of the will the next day confirmed what Harrison had told Sarah months before. The ranch, both properties from her late husband as well as Harrison's, had been legally combined. The entire operation was passed to her and Thomas. Harrison had also provided provisions for the staff as well as charitable donations to the town. A separate bequest left Matthew a substantial sum of money to pursue his own ambitions, whether here or elsewhere. Harrison's cousins departed in barely concealed fury, threats of legal challenges trailing behind them. The lawyer assured Sarah that the will was ironclad, Harrison having documented his sound mind and clear intentions extensively. When they were alone again, Sarah found Matthew packing his saddlebags. You're leaving? She asked from the doorway of his room. It seems best. He didn't look at her. The ranch is yours now. Our ranch, Sarah corrected. I'm sure that you know. Harrison intended for us to manage it together. Is that what you want? Matthew finally turned to face her. To be tied to your husband's brother through business, watching the ranch that should have been his run by his brother's widow? The bitterness in his tone surprised her. I thought we'd moved beyond that. Beyond what? The reality of our situation? Matthew shook his head. Harrison married you to secure his legacy. He left me money to pursue my ambitions. His intentions are clear. Are they? Sarah stepped closer. Because he told me something different. What? That he hoped we'd find happiness together. The admission cost her pride, but Sarah continued. That what began as a business arrangement had become a family, however briefly. Matthew stared at her, conflict evident in his expression. And what did you tell him? That I agreed to be his wife, not to transfer that role to his brother. Sarah held his gaze steadily. But that was before? Before what? Before I knew you. The simple truth hung between them. Before I saw the man beneath that anger and suspicion. The man who taught my son to carve, who held his brother's hand as he died, who stood beside me against gossip and accusations. Matthew's expression softened. Sarah? I'm not asking for declarations or promises, she interrupted. Only time. Stay through the spring, help me manage the transition. Let us learn who we are without Harrison between us. And if what we find is only friendship? Matthew asked quietly. Or less? Then we'll know? Sarah took a deep breath. But if it's more... The possibility remained unspoken, yet filled the space between them with potential neither had dared acknowledge until now. Matthew crossed to the window, looking out at the ranch, at the land that had driven him away from his brother and now drew him back. Spring, he said finally. I'll stay until spring. Sarah well understood the compromise. The north pasture fence needs repair before the thaw. A smile tugged at Matthew's lips. Always practical. It served me well so far. Sarah moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the frame. Dinner's at 6. Thomas is hoping you'll continue his writing lessons tomorrow. I'd like that. Matthew's expression held something new. It was not quite hope, but perhaps its beginning. Sarah? She turned back. Yes? Harrison was right about one thing. What's that? You are deserving? The simple words carried weight beyond their measure. Of everything he wanted for you? Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest. As are you, Matthew Wells. As are you. As she closed the door behind her, Sarah thought of Harrison, of the unexpected gift his business proposition had become. Not just financial security or a home for her son, but the chance at something she'd never truly experienced. A partnership built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and perhaps, in time, love. Spring would come, the land would renew itself. And with it, perhaps, so would they.